What if everything you believed about why you think, feel, and behave the way you do was only half the story? Two men, both students of Freud, both brilliant, both radical in their own way, looked at the human mind and saw something completely different. And the gap between what they saw might be the most important question in psychology, because one of them might understand you better than you understand yourself. My name is not important. What matters is this. By the end of this video, you will never look at your own thoughts the same way again. Let's start at the beginning. Sigmund Freud believed that the unconscious was a dark basement, full of repressed desires, forbidden impulses, and memories too painful to face. He built the foundation of modern psychology on that idea. And then two of his most gifted students walked away from him. Not because they were wrong, but because they felt Freud had only opened the door and refused to step through it. Those two men were Gustav Jung and Alfred Adler. And here's what's fascinating. They both disagreed with Freud, but they disagreed with each other just as deeply. Which means only one question remains. Whose vision of the human mind is closer to the truth? Stay with me, because this gets genuinely interesting. Let's talk about Jung first, because for most people, he's the more familiar name. Jung believed that beneath the personal unconscious, the part Freud talked about, there was something deeper, older, and far more mysterious. He called it the collective unconscious, a vast shared reservoir of symbols, images, and patterns that all human beings carry within them, regardless of culture, language, or time period. He called these patterns archetypes. Think about this for a moment. Why does every culture in the world have a story about a great flood? Why does every mythology have a hero who descends into darkness and comes back transformed? Why does the image of a wise old man appear in the dreams of a child who has never read a single fairy tale? For Jung, the answer was simple. Because these patterns are not learned, they are inherited. They are written into the very structure of the human psyche, passed down through millennia of shared human experience. The hero, the shadow. The great mother, the self. These are not metaphors. For Jung, they were living forces, operating beneath the surface of every human life. And the shadow is where it gets personal. The shadow is everything you have rejected about yourself. The anger you were taught to suppress. The ambition you were told was selfish. The parts of you that don't fit the image of who you think you should be. Jung believed that when we refuse to acknowledge the shadow, it doesn't disappear, it grows. It comes out sideways in the people we irrationally despise, in the fears we cannot explain, in the patterns we keep repeating without understanding why. You know that person who irritates you for no clear reason. Jung would say, look closer. What you're seeing in them is something you have refused to see in yourself. That's not comfortable, but it might be true. No, stay with me, because this is where the real contrast begins. Adler had a completely different answer to the question of what drives human beings. Where Jung looked inward and downward into myth, dream, symbol, and the ancient layers of the psyche, Adler looked forward. He was not interested in what was hidden in the basement of your mind. He was interested in where you were going. Adler's central idea was this: every human being is driven by a goal. Not a goal they have consciously chosen, not necessarily a goal they are even aware of, but a goal nonetheless. And that goal, more than anything else, shapes who they are. He called this the fictional final goal. Imagine someone who works 90 hours a week, never delegates, can't trust anyone to do things right, and secretly believes that if they slow down for even a moment, everything will fall apart. Freud might look at that person and say, there's a childhood wound here, a trauma, a repressed fear. Jung might say, the shadow is speaking. The archetype of the hero has been inflated. Adler would say something different. He would say, that person has a goal. The goal might be, I must be in control at all times to feel safe, or I must be indispensable, because only then do I have value. The behavior, However exhausting or self-destructive it looks from the outside, is perfectly logical if you understand what that person is trying to achieve. And here's where Adler becomes quietly radical. He believed that goal is not fixed. It can be understood, it can be changed. And when it changes, the person changes. This brings us to one of the most important differences between the two. Jung was not optimistic about the possibility of becoming a radically different person. His work was about integration, bringing the different parts of yourself into relationship. Learning to live with your contradictions, befriending your shadow rather than defeating it. Transformation, for Jung, was slow, mysterious, and never fully complete. He compared it to alchemy, a process of refining, not erasing. Adler was more hopeful. He believed that insight could genuinely change behavior. That once you understood why you were doing what you were doing, once you could see the goal behind the pattern, you had real freedom to choose differently. He was, in many ways, the grandfather of modern therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, positive psychology, all of them carry Adler's fingerprints. The idea that you are not a prisoner of your past, that your history explains you but does not define you. That change is possible, not just as a vague hope, but as a practical reality. If you have ever sat with a therapist who asked you, what are you hoping to get from that behavior? Or what would it mean for you if this problem went away? You were sitting with Adler's ghost in the room. Now let's talk about something both of them cared deeply about, but saw very differently. The question of why we suffer. For Jung, suffering was meaningful. It was not a mistake. It was not a sign that something had gone wrong. When a person went through a depression, a crisis, a period of dissolution, Jung called this the dark night of the soul. He did not see it as a breakdown. He saw it as a breakthrough in waiting. He believed that the psyche was always trying to become more complete. When we ignore too much of ourselves for too long, the unconscious forces are reckoning. The structures we built to keep ourselves safe, the persona, the mask we wear for the world eventually crack. And in the cracks, something real can finally come through. There is something deeply comforting in this idea. The thought that the hardest periods of your life were not pointless. That the darkness was not simply darkness, but a kind of pressure. The pressure of becoming. Adler agreed that suffering mattered, but he located it differently. For him, suffering was almost always connected to what he called the inferiority feeling. Every human being, he argued, begins life in a state of helplessness. We are small, dependent, vulnerable, surrounded by people who are larger and more capable than we are. And from that original experience, we develop a feeling, sometimes vague, sometimes overwhelming, that we are not enough. This feeling is not pathological. It is universal. It is, in fact, the engine of human development. Because the natural response to feeling inadequate is to try to overcome it, to grow, to learn, to strive. Adler called this the drive towards superiority, and he didn't mean it in the arrogant sense. He meant the universal human desire to move from a state of less to a state of more, to feel capable, to feel whole. The problem comes when the strategy we develop to manage that feeling becomes rigid, disconnected from reality, or harmful to others. The person who compensates for deep insecurity by seeking to dominate everyone around them. The person who avoids all challenge because failure would be unbearable proof that they were right about themselves all along. The person who makes themselves sick so they never have to face the question of whether they could have succeeded. Adler saw all of this with a kind of clear, compassionate precision. He didn't pathologize people. He understood them. And this is perhaps the most striking difference between Jung and Adler when you step back and look at the full picture. Jung was a poet of the mind. He was drawn to mystery, to the irrational, to the things that cannot be fully explained. His work is vast, strange, sometimes almost mystical. Reading Jung, you feel as though you are standing at the edge of something ancient and enormous. His ideas about the shadow, the anima, and animus, Individuation, synchronicity. They resonate not because they are scientifically precise, but because they feel deeply, almost uncomfortably true. Adler was a humanist and a Democrat. He was the son of a merchant, raised in Vienna, trained as a general practitioner before he turned to psychology. He cared, with unusual intensity, about the ordinary person. He opened free clinics. He trained teachers. He believed that psychology was not the property of the wealthy or the intellectually elite. It belonged to everyone. Where Jung said, "Go deeper, go darker, go into the myth," Adler said, "Look at the person in front of you. Understand what they are trying to do and help them do it better." So who is right? The honest answer is that they are asking different questions. Jung is asking, what are we? What is the nature of the psyche? And how does it relate to the deepest structures of human experience? Adler is asking, why do we do what we do, and how do we do it differently? One is a map of the territory. The other is a guide to moving through it. If you are in the middle of a crisis, if you are trying to understand why you keep ending up in the same painful situations, if you want to change something real and specific about your life, Adler gives you tools. Practical, humane, surprisingly modern tools. If you are trying to understand yourself at a deeper level, if you are drawn to dreams, to meaning, to the strange, recurring symbols in your inner life, if you want not just to function better, but to understand what it means to be you, Jung gives you a language. The good news is that you don't have to choose. What both of them understood, in their very different ways, was something simple and profound. Most of us are not living freely. We are living according to patterns we didn't consciously create, in pursuit of goals we have never quite named, carrying shadows we refuse to acknowledge. And the first step toward anything better is not a technique or a strategy or a reframe. It is something older and quieter than that. It is understanding. Understanding that the mind is not your enemy, that the patterns that seem to hold you back were once ways of surviving, that the darkness has something to tell you if you are willing to listen, that you are not broken. You are, in the most literal sense, a work in progress. Adler would say, you are moving toward something. Make sure you know what it is. Jung would say, you are becoming something. Don't be afraid of what you find on the way. Both of them, in their disagreement, were pointing at the same truth. The mind is not a problem to be solved. It is a life to be lived. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Don't forget to like the video, and if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.